when the Pinecrest Gardens HOA blocked my entire driveway with 5 massive shipping containers. They had no idea they just declared war on their own landlord. How would they react when they discovered the quiet homeowner they'd been harassing for months actually owned the very building where they collected their precious HOA fees? I spat out my coffee when I looked out my front window. 5 giant metal shipping containers sat in my driveway, blocking my garage completely. My car was trapped inside, and I had a meeting in 40 minutes. What the heck is this? I shouted to no one, rushing outside in my bathrobe and slippers. The containers were massive, rusty, blue metal boxes stacked nearly to the second floor of my house. My neighbor Diane stood in her yard, watering plants with a smug smile on her face. She wore her usual outfit: beige pants, crisp white blouse, and that gold HOA president pin she never took off. "Morning, James," she called, way too cheerful. "Quite the surprise, isn't it?" I stormed toward her, pointing at the metal wall blocking my driveway. "Did you do this? How am I supposed to get to work?" Diane put her watering can down slowly, like she was enjoying every second. "The Pinecrest Gardens HOA voted last week. These containers are being stored here temporarily. We sent notices to everyone." "I never got any notice," I said, checking my phone for missed emails. "Nothing." "Well, that's strange. Everyone else received theirs." She shrugged. "Maybe check your spam folder. Anyway, it's just for a few months." "Months?" My voice cracked. "This is completely insane. You can't just block someone's driveway." "Actually, we can. It's in the HOA agreement, Section 12.3, Temporary Use of Common Spaces for Community Improvement Projects. Your driveway extends onto community property by exactly 4 feet. "That's not true. We measured yesterday." She pointed to faint chalk marks on the pavement. "Richard and Karen confirmed it." Of course they did. Richard and Karen, Diane's 2 favorite HOA committee members, who spent their retirement measuring grass height and counting how many Christmas lights people put up. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling a tow truck," I said, reaching for my phone. Diane's smile faded. "That would violate HOA rules. You'll be fined $500 per container moved without permission." She turned back toward her house. "Board meeting tonight at 7. You're welcome to file a complaint then." I stood there in my slippers, fuming. 5 years I'd lived in Pinecrest Gardens. 5 years of petty rules and power trips. My mailbox was non-regulation blue last month. My bird feeder was attracting non-approved wildlife the month before that. Inside, I called my boss to explain I'd be working from home. Then I phoned every towing company in town. None would touch the containers without HOA approval. My doorbell rang at noon. It was Mrs. Patel from across the street, holding a casserole dish. "I brought lunch," she said quietly. "I saw what they did. It's not right." Mrs. Patel was the neighborhood grandma. Had lived here 30 years before the HOA even existed. We sat at my kitchen table while I explained my predicament. "Diane's been after me since I moved in," I said between bites of amazing butter chicken. "But this is next level." "She does this," Mrs. Patel nodded. "Picks one person each year to make an example of. Last year it was the Millers. Their son's basketball hoop was unsightly. They moved away." "Well, I'm not moving," I said firmly. "I've worked too hard for this house." After Mrs. Patel left, I dug through my home office for my property documents. The HOA agreement was thicker than a phone book. As I flipped through endless pages of rules, my phone dinged with an email notification. It was from my property management company, Monthly Rent Collection Summary, Westland Commercial Properties. I clicked it open absently, still reading the HOA rules. The list of businesses who paid rent to my company scrolled by. Near the bottom, one name made me stop breathing for a second. Pinecrest Gardens Homeowners Association. Wait, what? I scrolled back up. There it was. The HOA rented their office space in a small commercial building nearby. A building I had purchased through my company, Westland Properties, 8 years ago as an investment. The same company that sent the rent statement I was looking at. I laughed so hard tears came to my eyes. The HOA had no idea they were renting from me. I'd bought the property through my LLC, and my property manager handled everything. They had no clue that James Reynolds and Westland Properties were the same person. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. Your garden gnomes exceed height restrictions by 2.3 inches. $150 fine will be added to your HOA dues. I walked to my window and looked at the shipping containers, then at my poor garden gnomes who had apparently committed the crime of being too tall. Then I checked the HOA lease details on my laptop. Their lease renewal was due in exactly 27 days. The 7 p.m. HOA meeting would be interesting tonight. Very interesting indeed. I straightened my tie in the mirror before leaving for the community center. For once, I was actually looking forward to an HOA meeting. Walking was my only option, thanks to my imprisoned car. Along the way, neighbors gave me sympathetic looks. Some quickly averted their eyes, afraid to be seen showing support. The community center was packed. I spotted Diane at the front table with Richard and Karen, all shuffling important-looking papers. Karen's gray bob haircut was so stiff it didn't move when she nodded at something Richard whispered to her. I took a seat in the back row. Mrs. Patel gave me a small wave from across the room. Let's call this meeting to order, Diane announced, tapping her gavel unnecessarily. First item, the new container storage project. A slideshow appeared on the wall. Pinecrest Gardens Community Enhancement Initiative. Read the first slide, with a stock photo of happy people in a park. As you know, Diane continued, we've entered an exciting partnership with Logitrans Shipping. They're paying us $2,000 monthly to store containers temporarily on community property. Richard stood up. This income will fund our new decorative street signs and additional surveillance cameras. A man in the front row raised his hand. Where exactly are these containers being stored? There's 5 of them blocking James Reynolds' driveway. All eyes turned to me. Mr. Reynolds' driveway extends 4 feet onto common property, Karen stated, reading from her clipboard. According to section 12.3, I measured my property line this afternoon, I interrupted. My driveway is fully within my property boundaries. Karen's face flushed. Our measurements were wrong, I finished. I have my original property survey right here. I held up the document. Nothing in the HOA agreement allows you to block access to my home. Diane cleared her throat. We've determined it's temporary community storage space. You've determined? I asked, standing up now. Was there a vote on specifically using my driveway? The room grew uncomfortable. Mrs. Peterson from 2 doors down spoke up. I don't remember voting on whose driveway would be blocked. It was an executive decision, Richard said, his voice hardening. Sometimes leadership requires making tough choices. I walked slowly to the front of the room. Let me understand this. You've signed a deal to make money by storing containers, and you're putting them in front of my house without my permission. The needs of the community outweigh individual inconvenience, Diane said firmly. This benefits everyone. Except me, I replied. I can't use my garage. I can't access my car. Karen sniffed. Perhaps you should carpool until the project is complete. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even HOA supporters looked uncomfortable. How long will the containers be there? Someone asked. 6 to 8 months, Richard answered. The room erupted. Even for rule-following Pinecrest Gardens, this was too much. I raised my hand until the noise settled. I have a question. Diane nodded reluctantly. Does everyone know who owns the building where the HOA office is located? Confusion spread across the room. Karen glanced at Diane, who frowned. Westland Properties is our landlord, she stated. Why is that relevant? I smiled, feeling a strange calm come over me. Just wondering if you've met the owner, since your lease is up for renewal next month. Diane's eyes narrowed. We deal with a management company. This is completely off topic, Mr. Reynolds. Is it? I took out my business card and placed it on their table. James Reynolds, CEO, Westland Properties LLC. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. Karen picked up the card, her hand trembling slightly. Her eyes widened as she showed it to Diane. This meeting is adjourned, Diane announced suddenly, her voice cracking. We'll continue this discussion at a later date. As people filed out, whispering excitedly, Mrs. Patel caught up with me. You own their building? She asked, eyes twinkling. For 8 years, I confirmed. They never bothered to check who was behind the company name. Richard approached us, his face tense. This changes nothing, he said quietly. The container agreement is already signed. Interesting, I replied, because I was just thinking about how the HOA office would look with some renovations. The kind that might require tenants to vacate for 6 to 8 months. His face paled. Just an idea, I added with a smile. I should go home and sleep on it. Big day tomorrow. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, Reynolds. I looked back at the community center, where Diane, Richard, and Karen huddled in intense conversation, occasionally glancing my way. The shipping containers still blocked my driveway, but somehow they didn't bother me quite as much anymore. The real battle was just beginning. I woke to the sound of engines. Lots of engines. Jumping out of bed, I rushed to my window to find 3 news vans parked on my street. Reporters with microphones stood in front of my container-block driveway. A drone buzzed overhead, filming the scene. My doorbell rang frantically. When I opened it, a woman with a microphone thrust it toward my face. Mr. Reynolds, Channel 8 News. Can you tell our viewers how it feels to be trapped in your home by your own HOA? How did you... I started, but she continued talking. Sources tell us the Pinecrest Gardens HOA has blocked your driveway with shipping containers. Is this true? My phone buzzed nonstop with text messages from neighbors. OMG, you're on the morning news. Diane is freaking out. Go get him, James. I blinked at the camera, still in my pajamas. Yes, that's correct. Within minutes, I'd given 4 interviews from my front porch. Social media was exploding with hashtag HOA Nightmare and hashtag ContainerGate hashtags. Someone had posted photos of my blocked driveway online, and the story had gone viral overnight. By noon, the HOA's phone was ringing off the hook. I know because Karen called me, her voice tight with anger. What have you done? She hissed. We're getting calls from all over the country. I didn't call the media, I said truthfully. Maybe someone at the meeting last night did. This is damaging our community's reputation, she insisted. You need to tell them it's being resolved. Is it? I asked. Because there are still 5 shipping containers blocking my driveway. She hung up on me. My lawyer, Samantha, arrived at 2 p.m., stepping carefully around news crews in her immaculate suit. Well, she said once we were inside, you've certainly caused a stir. I showed her the property documents and the HOA lease. What can they actually do? Can they really block my driveway like this? She adjusted her glasses, reviewing the paperwork. Not legally, no. They're violating local ordinances about emergency access, for starters. So I can have them towed? Yes, but... She tapped her pen thoughtfully. You have something much more interesting here with the building lease. Their renewal is coming up, and as the landlord, you have considerable leverage. I don't want to evict them, I admitted. I just want them to stop the power trips and remove these containers. Samantha smiled. Then let's draft some new lease terms. As she typed on her laptop, Mrs. Patel knocked on my back door, sneaking through yards to avoid the media. James, it's chaos. Diane called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. They're saying you orchestrated this whole media circus to embarrass them. I sighed. I didn't call any reporters. Did you? She grinned mischievously. My grandson might have posted something on that TikTok thing. He has many followers. I laughed. Quiet Mrs. Patel, causing trouble with social media. Who would have guessed? There's more, she continued, lowering her voice. Logitrans Shipping called Diane. They don't want bad publicity and are threatening to cancel their container contract. That explained the commotion I'd heard from Diane's house earlier. What sounded like a vase smashing against a wall. After Mrs. Patel left, Samantha finished drafting our proposal. This gives them 2 options, she explained. Either they keep their office space under new terms, or they find somewhere else to rent within 30 days. The new terms were simple: immediate removal of the containers, a public apology, changes to the HOA board structure to prevent future abuses of power, and a rewrite of some of the more ridiculous rules. It's reasonable, not vindictive, Samantha assured me. Courts would view this favorably if they try to fight it. As evening approached, the media circus grew. Someone had ordered pizzas for the reporters, who now camped on the sidewalk. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from neighbors, news outlets, and even a Hollywood producer interested in option rights to my story. I dressed carefully for the emergency meeting, business casual, nothing flashy. The last thing I wanted was to look like I was gloating. Walking toward the community center, I noticed Richard taking photos of my house from different angles. When he saw me, he quickly pocketed his phone and hurried away. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity. People from neighboring communities had shown up after seeing the news. Diane, Richard, and Karen sat at the front, looking grim. Diane called for order, her voice strained. This emergency session will address the current situation, with the storage containers and the resulting media attention, which Mr. Reynolds orchestrated. Karen interjected, pointing at me. Several people booed. I was surprised by the support. I didn't contact any media, I stated calmly, but the containers are real, and they're illegally blocking my property. Richard stood, holding up photos. We have documentation proving the containers are on community property. And we have satellite images showing your fence extends beyond your property line by nearly 2 feet. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. They were trying to flip the script, make me the rule breaker. I looked at the photos. Those are doctored. My property line was professionally surveyed just last year. Convenient claim, Karen sniffed. Do you have proof? Actually, said a voice from the doorway. I do. Everyone turned to see Mr. Goldstein, the county surveyor, standing there with official-looking maps. He'd been my poker buddy for years, though few in the neighborhood knew that. James asked me to verify his property boundaries this morning, Mr. Goldstein announced, unrolling a large map on the center table. Not only is his driveway completely within his property, but the HOA has actually encroached on his land by placing these containers here, here, and here. He pointed to specific spots. Richard's face turned red. This is just your friend helping you. Mr. Goldstein is the county's official surveyor, I replied calmly. Are you questioning his professional integrity? The room grew tense. Diane whispered urgently to Karen, who was frantically texting someone. Furthermore, I continued, I've had my lawyer review the HOA agreement. Nothing in it permits blocking access to a resident's home, regardless of where property lines fall. We had no choice, Diane insisted. The Logitrans contract required specific placement. So you prioritized money over a homeowner's access to their property? Asked Mrs. Peterson loudly. That's not what an HOA is supposed to do. Others voiced agreement. The mood in the room was shifting dramatically. Karen stood up, her voice shrill. This meeting is about Mr. Reynolds' vindictive attempt to damage our community's reputation. He's threatening our HOA office lease because of a personal vendetta. I remained calm. I haven't threatened anything. But as your landlord, I am concerned about how the HOA is being run. You became our landlord in secret, Richard shouted. You never disclosed this conflict of interest. There was no conflict until you blocked my driveway, I pointed out. I've been a hands-off landlord for 8 years. The property management company handles everything. Samantha stood beside me now, handing copies of our proposal to Diane, Richard, and Karen. My client is offering reasonable terms for lease renewal. They scanned the documents, their expressions darkening. This is blackmail, Diane hissed. It's negotiation, Samantha corrected. My client has no obligation to renew your lease under the previous terms. The crowd murmured, trying to understand what was happening. Mrs. Patel stood up. Perhaps, she suggested in her gentle voice, we should all see these new terms, since this affects our whole community. Samantha nodded, distributing more copies. As people read, excited conversation filled the room. Elimination of fines for minor infractions? Board elections every year instead of every 5 years? Rules can be changed by community vote, not just board decision? The energy was palpable. Many residents had suffered under the current regime but had been too intimidated to speak up. Diane banged her gavel desperately. This is outrageous. He can't dictate how our HOA operates just because he owns the building. Actually, Samantha interjected. He's not dictating anything. He's offering a lease renewal with conditions. You're free to find another location if you prefer. A voice called from the back. How much are we paying for rent anyway? And where would that money come from if not our HOA dues? Diane's face paled. The financial records were supposed to be transparent, but many residents realized they'd never actually seen them. Just then, the doors burst open. A man in a Logitrans shipping uniform strode in, looking furious. Which one of you is Diane Mercer? He demanded. Your containers need to be moved immediately. This PR nightmare is violating our contract terms. As chaos erupted, Karen's phone buzzed. She looked at it, then whispered urgently to Diane and Richard. Their faces fell simultaneously. I watched curiously as they huddled in intense conversation. Finally, Diane approached me, strain evident in her forced smile. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, she suggested, gesturing to a side room. I'm happy to talk here, I replied. Transparency seems overdue in Pinecrest Gardens. Karen joined us, her voice low and urgent. The city inspector just called. They're issuing citations for the containers. Apparently they violate multiple codes and were placed without proper permits. Which you knew, I said, realization dawning. That's why you didn't go through official channels. Richard looked away guiltily. Diane's composure finally cracked. Fine, we'll move the containers. But your lease demands are still unreasonable. I glanced around the room, at neighbors now openly discussing years of HOA overreach. I don't think they find them unreasonable. But here's another option. I'll sell the building. They looked confused. To the HOA? I clarified. At a fair market price with reasonable financing. Then you won't have a landlord to worry about. We can't afford to buy a building, Karen exclaimed. With the money you've collected in excessive fines over the years? Mrs. Patel asked innocently. And the $2,000 monthly container fee? I think we'd all like to see those financial records. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Diane's response. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. This isn't over, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. You have no idea what you've started. As the meeting dissolved into heated discussions about financial audits and emergency board elections, the Logitrans representative approached me. Your driveway should be clear by morning, he assured me. And between us, we're canceling our contract with these people. Too much drama. I nodded gratefully, but something bothered me. Outside, through the window, I spotted Richard making a phone call, gesturing angrily. When he noticed me watching, he turned away quickly. Samantha touched my arm. Great result, but stay vigilant. People like this don't surrender power easily. As I walked home through the darkness, the weight of victory felt heavier than I expected. The shipping containers would be gone soon, but something told me I just traded one problem for something potentially worse. Approaching my house, I noticed something odd. A small red dot danced across my front door, then disappeared. Probably kids with laser pointers, I thought. But when I reached my porch, I found a note taped to my door. Property records work both ways. I wonder what secrets Westland Properties is hiding. A chill ran through me as I remembered the filing cabinet in my office, the one containing documents about all my properties, including some purchased through methods that, while legal, wouldn't look good if made public. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The battle for Pinecrest Gardens had just entered a dangerous new phase. Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7. The email flashed on my phone as I balanced on a stepladder, trying to peek into my garage window. My car sat helplessly trapped behind the wall of shipping containers for the third straight day. My blood boiled. They block my driveway, then call a meeting without fixing the problem? I snapped photos of the containers from different angles, measuring the exact distance to my property line with a tape measure. Evidence gathering. The doorbell rang just as I finished. Mrs. Patel stood there, her kind eyes worried behind her glasses. "James, I wanted to check if you're okay," she said quietly. "I voted against this container nonsense." "There was a vote?" I asked, inviting her in. "I never received any notice." Mrs. Patel shook her head. "That's what I feared. Karen and Diane have been holding emergency sessions with just their friends. Many of us only find out after decisions are made." "Is that even legal under the HOA bylaws?" I asked, offering her tea. "No," she said firmly. "But anyone who objects gets targeted with sudden violations and fines." My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer Samantha. "Call me. Found something big." After Mrs. Patel left, I called immediately. "James, I've got the property records for the HOA office building," Samantha said, excitement in her voice. "Your LLC has owned it for 8 years. They're your tenants." I nearly dropped my phone. Westland Properties LLC was my investment company, named after my grandfather's farm. I'd bought several commercial buildings years ago as passive income, letting my management company handle everything. "Their lease renews next month," Samantha continued. "You're literally their landlord." At 6:55 p.m., I arrived at the community center in my best suit, carrying a leather portfolio. The room buzzed with neighbors, many looking as confused as I felt when first seeing those containers. "What's with the suit, Reynolds?" Richard sneered as I took a seat. "Job interview to find work since you can't leave your house?" I smiled politely, saying nothing. Diane banged her gavel precisely at 7. "Welcome to this emergency session. First order of business: finalizing our community improvement project." A slideshow began, showing fancy playground equipment and landscaping plans. "Thanks to our partnership with Logitrans Shipping," Diane continued proudly, "we've secured $50,000 by allowing temporary container storage on community property." Murmurs filled the room. Mrs. Patel raised her hand. "But those containers are blocking James's driveway completely." Karen stepped forward, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Mr. Reynolds's inconvenience is unfortunate but necessary for community progress. Perhaps if he attended more meetings, he'd understand our vision." "I wasn't notified about these meetings," I said calmly. "Notices were sent," Richard insisted. "Not our fault if you don't check your mail." Diane nodded. "We're improving property values for everyone. The containers stay for 6 months per our contract." I raised my hand. Diane pointedly ignored me until several neighbors pointed at me. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds?" she sighed dramatically. "I'd like to understand the legal basis for blocking access to my property," I said, "especially since it appears the decision was made without proper quorum or notification according to Section 5 of our bylaws." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening legal action?" "I'm just asking questions," I replied. "For instance, did you know that the Pinecrest Gardens HOA office is owned by Westland Properties LLC? Confused looks spread across the board members' faces. "What does that have to do with anything?" Diane snapped. I stood slowly, walking to the front of the room. "I'd like to introduce myself properly. I'm James Reynolds, founder and CEO of Westland Properties LLC. The room went completely silent. "Your landlord?" I added, placing my business card on the table in front of Diane. "And I've brought some proposed changes to your lease renewal next month." Diane's face transformed as she recognized my company logo from years of rent checks. Her mouth opened and closed without making a sound. This is, she stammered. "A coincidence?" I suggested. "Not really. Just interesting timing that you choose to target the person who owns your building." I looked around the room at the shocked faces. "Now, about those containers. You can't do this." Karen's voice echoed through the parking lot as neighbors streamed out of the meeting hall. Rain had started falling, matching the stormy mood. You planned this all along. I closed my umbrella, offering it to Mrs. Patel as she hurried to her car. Actually, I had no idea until my lawyer discovered the connection yesterday, I explained calmly. I've been a hands-off landlord. Richard jabbed a finger at my chest. This is extortion. Using your position to force changes. I prefer to call it leverage, I replied, stepping back. And all I'm asking is for you to follow your own rules. Remove the containers blocking my property. Hold proper votes with full community notification. And stop targeting homeowners with selective enforcement. Diane joined us, her perfect hair wilting in the rain. You'll regret this, she hissed. We have a binding contract with Logitrans. Show me the contract, I said. Let everyone see exactly what you signed. She hesitated, glancing nervously at Karen. That's what I thought, I continued. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow with terms for your lease renewal. Among them, removal of all containers within 24 hours, new HOA board elections with independent oversight, and complete revision of how rules are enforced. Or what? Richard demanded. Or I'll find new tenants when your lease expires next month, I said simply. I'm not threatening anything illegal, just business. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. Outside now. Important. I excused myself to find my lawyer waiting by her car. James, there's more, she said urgently. I checked the easement records. Those containers aren't just annoying, they're illegal. They're blocking a fire access route, and they don't have proper permits. Who would I report that to? I asked. Already called the fire marshal, she grinned. Inspection tomorrow morning at 9. Sleep came easily for the first time in days. At 6 a.m., my doorbell rang repeatedly. Diane stood there, makeup-free and wild-eyed. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into my living room. Your lease terms are impossible. Coffee, I offered. Stop playing games, she snapped. Logitrans paid us already. We spent half the money on the playground equipment. That sounds like a you problem, I replied, filling my coffee pot. Perhaps you should have consulted the entire community before making decisions. You don't understand what you're doing, she insisted. I've built this community into something special. Property values have increased 40% under my leadership. By bullying people about their garden gnomes and mailboxes? I asked. Diane collapsed onto my couch, suddenly looking much older. You have no idea what it takes to maintain standards. People would paint their houses purple and park boats in their yards if I let them. Maybe that's their right, I suggested. Then why even have an HOA? She demanded. Good question, I replied. By 8:30, a small crowd had gathered near my driveway. Word about the fire marshal's visit had spread through neighborhood text chains. I spotted Mrs. Patel distributing coffee from a thermos. Even Richard was there, standing awkwardly apart from the others. At precisely 9, a white SUV with official markings pulled up. Fire Marshal Rodriguez stepped out, clipboard in hand. What's going on here? He asked, surveying the shipping containers. I started to answer, but Karen rushed forward. These are temporary storage units approved by our homeowners association, she explained breathlessly. All completely legal and proper. Do you have permits for these? Rodriguez asked, making notes. They're temporary, Karen stammered. Blocking a fire lane, Rodriguez noted, pointing to small markers I hadn't even noticed. And he walked around the containers. No hazardous materials signage. That's 3 violations. We can move them, Diane offered quickly. Immediately, Rodriguez agreed. And there will be fines. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Check your email now. It was from Marcus, a quiet neighbor I barely knew. The email contained screenshots of private HOA board messages discussing how to teach Reynolds a lesson after I questioned a previous fine. They had specifically targeted my property for the containers. As tow trucks arrived to remove the containers, I showed the screenshots to Samantha. That's harassment and potentially illegal, she whispered. You could sue them personally, not just the HOA. I watched as the first container lifted off the ground, revealing my garage door for the first time in days. Neighbors clapped. Richard approached hesitantly. James, can we talk? Privately, we walked to the edge of my property. Look, I know how this seems, he began. But Diane and Karen have something on everyone on the board. Old violations, exceptions they granted. They've created a whole system. Blackmail, I asked, surprised. Control, he corrected. I didn't want those containers here. None of us did accept them. Why tell me this now? Because, he sighed heavily, someone needs to stop them, and you're the only one who can. That evening, as the last container disappeared down the street, my phone rang constantly with neighbors sharing their HOA horror stories. Mrs. Patel organized an impromptu gathering on my lawn. We should have stood up to them years ago, she said as neighbors nodded. But we were afraid. Not anymore, Marcus added firmly. As darkness fell and neighbors departed, Diane's car pulled up. Alone, she walked slowly to my porch where I sat enjoying my unobstructed view for the first time in days. The board has decided to resign, she said without greeting, holding out a folder with trembling hands. Effective immediately. I accepted the folder without opening it. That's a start. What happens now? She asked, suddenly looking lost. That, I replied, is up to the community. Not just you, not just me. And the HOA office lease? She questioned. I smiled. I think I'll attend the next meeting to discuss that. A properly notified, fully transparent meeting with all neighbors welcome. As Diane walked away, my phone buzzed with a message from an anonymous number. Check your security cameras from last night. You'll want to see who was snooping around your property at 2 a.m. What new twist awaited in this neighborhood power struggle? I stood in my kitchen pouring coffee when a soft knock surprised me. Mrs. Patel waited on my doorstep, holding a tray of homemade samosas. You're fighting the HOA alone. That's not right, she said, eyes determined behind her glasses. My home should feel like mine after 30 years here. Her words sparked an idea. What if we talk to everyone? Not a formal meeting. Just neighbors being honest with each other. Word spread quickly. By Sunday afternoon, my backyard filled with families who'd never spoken beyond polite waves. Children chased each other through sprinklers while adults gathered in a circle of lawn chairs. I've never hosted an HOA rebellion before, I joked, breaking the ice. But I think we all have stories to share. Hands shot up immediately. They fined me $200 for planting tomatoes, Marcus said, his voice shaking with anger. Called them unauthorized vegetation. My rainbow flag disappeared 3 times, added Elena. The 3rd time, Karen left a note about appropriate displays. One by one, neighbors revealed years of frustration. Denied garden expansions, fights over holiday decorations, arbitrary fines. The previous board hadn't created community. They'd created fear. What exactly do we want instead? Asked Eric, who'd moved in just last month. I smiled. What if we focused on safety and thoughtfulness instead of control? Rules that help rather than restrict. But who decides those rules? Someone called out. What stops new leaders from becoming just like the old ones? The yard fell silent until Marcus's teenage daughter spoke up. What if everyone gets a turn, and nobody can be in charge for too long? Her simple suggestion opened a flood of ideas. We drafted plans for rotation of positions, clear voting procedures, and limits on fines and enforcement. As darkness fell and neighbors drifted home, many lingered to chat. Real conversations happening perhaps for the first time in years. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source. Karen. I never meant to become the neighborhood villain, she wrote. The power changed me, changed all of us. I stared at her words, wondering if this apparent apology was sincere or another manipulation. Could someone who'd created so much conflict truly change? The next morning brought another surprise. A crew arrived at the common area with wheelbarrows and shovels. Richard directed them toward the shipping containers, which workers were cutting open along one side. "What's happening?" I asked, approaching cautiously. Richard couldn't meet my eyes. "Community garden project. Board approved it last night." He paused. "The containers were going to be scrapped anyway." "That's actually a good idea," I admitted, watching as neighbors gradually emerged from their homes, curious about the activity. "It wasn't mine," Richard said quietly. "It was Karen's." I walked away wondering, was this genuine change beginning, or just a clever strategy to improve their image before our next confrontation? The answer might determine whether Pinecrest Gardens could truly transform into the community we all secretly hoped for. Seasons changed as our neighborhood transformed. Gone were the threatening HOA newsletters, replaced by community updates filled with garden tips and babysitting exchanges. The shipping containers, once symbols of conflict, now housed thriving vegetable beds in the common area. I spotted Karen there on a warm Saturday, kneeling in dirt beside Mrs. Patel, both laughing as they compared tomato plants. Seeing them together still surprised me. "They've become gardening buddies," Marcus explained, joining me at the fence. "Never thought I'd see Karen with dirty hands by choice." Change hadn't come easily. The former board members initially fought against their loss of control. Diane moved away, selling her house within weeks. Richard stayed but remained distant, watching our community experiments from the sidelines. The most remarkable shift came from Karen. After her late-night message, she'd shown up at every volunteer day, working twice as hard as anyone else. Why the complete turnaround? I finally asked her one evening as we repainted the community center sign. Karen set down her brush. "My sister stopped speaking to me," she admitted. "She visited last spring and saw how I treated neighbors. Called me a small-town dictator." Her voice cracked. I didn't recognize myself in her description, but she was right. Our new approach wasn't perfect. Some residents missed the strict rules that kept properties looking identical. Others pushed for too much freedom, forgetting that communities need some basic agreements. The ultimate test came during the yearly budget meeting. As property owner, I could have forced decisions, but instead I sat quietly among my neighbors. When disagreements flared about spending priorities, people actually listened to each other. "Remember when these meetings ended with someone storming out crying?" Eric whispered beside me. The biggest surprise came after the meeting adjourned. Richard approached me, extending his hand. "I fought against you because I thought rules were what made a neighborhood good," he said. "I was wrong. It's the people." 6 months after the container blockade, our summer block party spilled across front yards with no property line debates. Children played freely, running between houses without worried parents checking HOA regulations. Mrs. Patel's door remained proudly purple. The Johnsons' wheelchair ramp stood sturdy and unpermitted. My garden gnomes, all 12 now, guarded my flower beds. As sunset painted the sky, neighbors gathered for an impromptu concert. Elena's teenage band played while adults spread blankets on lawns. Karen sat down beside me, offering a plate of cookies. "My grandmother's recipe," she explained. "I've never shared it before." "Why now?" I asked, accepting one. She looked around at our mismatched, imperfect, vibrant community. "Because some things are better when shared." I bit into the cookie, perfectly sweet and just a little messy, like Pinecrest Gardens itself. Sometimes the worst conflicts lead to the best communities. And sometimes 5 shipping containers blocking your driveway might be the beginning of something beautiful.